Damn, so we got some big news today. It's actually trending on Twitter. 4% in May is actually trending on Twitter. The article headline reads, inflation rose at a 4% annual rate in May, the lowest in 2 years. And so inflation had seriously cooled down. I mean, CPI was like 8% just like some months ago. I'm trying to remember in what month. I think in the winter time, 8-9%. If you don't know what CPI is, it's a consumer price index. It's actually how inflation is calculated. They take like a market basket of goods and then they basically calculate the price increases. And so the interesting thing about this is when inflation was originally falling, I saw a huge Republican backlash to the coverage that inflation was falling, because effectively what this means is that prices are still growing, but at a 4% rate instead of like an 8% rate. And so they were saying, oh, this is the media being biased or whatever. But there's an expected amount of inflation. In fact, you want inflation. Inflation is good. Deflation, unless it's like, oh, because a product is super cheap to make now, it's bad because it means that there's a recession going on in the economy. The economy is receding. People don't have money to buy goods. Businesses shut down, et cetera, and it just continues, right? The Fed aims for about a 2% inflation rate, right? CPI. So this headline is actually less favorable to Joe Biden. I think the media has some situations been like less nice to Joe Biden, but that's like a worse coverage framing for sure. But this is a big deal for Joe. So it says the inflation rate cooled in May to its lowest annual rate in more than 2 years, likely taking pressure off the Federal Reserve to continue raising interest rates, the Labor Department reported Tuesday. The Consumer Price Index, which measures changes in the multitude of goods and services, just increased just 0.1% for the month, bringing the annual level down to 4% from 4.9% in April. That 12-month increase was the smallest since March 2021, when inflation was just beginning to rise to what would become the highest in 41 years. Excluding volatile food and energy prices, the picture wasn't as optimistic. The so-called core inflation rose 0.4% on the month and was still up 5.3% from a year ago, indicating that while price pressures have eased somewhat, consumers are still under fire. And so headline inflation is the inflation of all goods across the economy. Core inflation excludes food and energy. And so the inflation for core inflation, which is actually surprising. So if you like take food and energy out, the inflation is actually higher, which is pretty interesting. I'm wondering if that's still like supply chain hits on it. All those numbers were exactly in line with the Dow Jones consensus estimates. A 3.6% slide in energy prices helped keep the CPI gain in check for the month. Food prices rose just 0.2%. However, a 0.6% increase shelter price was the biggest contributor to the increase for all items or headline CPI reading. Housing-related costs make up about 1/3 of the index's weighting. So it's pretty interesting. So this is just a big deal for Joe Biden in general. Now, the biggest indicator for whether or not a re-election for president is going to win is what's called peace and prosperity, which essentially means how well is the economy doing and how good is your approval rating, which is usually based on the economy. Now, Joe Biden is sort of a regression to the mean in terms of his approval rating is heavily based on how well the economy is doing, which is the traditional indicator. But Obama and Trump are like kind of weird deviations because everybody either hated them or loved them. The economy didn't actually move them that much. But the economy was, doing well under Trump until the final year. So the biggest indicator of re-election is how well the economy is doing in that final year. And so we're coming into the final year. The economy is swooping in a clutch position for Joe Biden. And so he's definitely in a solid position to win because inflation has tanked so hard. And he had already low-key seemed to be pretty resilient in terms of like his approval rating and stuff like that and the fire that he was getting. And so assuming nothing crazy happens in terms of the inflation rate rising, and especially with like Trump indictments and then how like extremist DeSantis is, I would say that it's pretty much guaranteed that Joe Biden is going to win re-election. Again, unless something weird happens with this inflation rate. Let's say inflation rate jumps back to like 8-9%, maybe even goes up to 7%. And again, I'm surprised with how the media is being like kind of not as friendly to Joe Biden. You would think they'd be friendly to Joe Biden, but saying like inflation rose instead of saying like inflation, like in the inflation rate has tanked, right? Because it's assumed inflation is an assumed increase, right? It's an assumed increase. And so it's like a weird framing of it. I don't know if it's from like right-wing backlash from last time when the media covered it positively. But Yeah, I would say this is a huge, huge deal for Joe Biden. And then if Trump is going to run against him, like he's going to be the nominee for sure. The only way that Trump would have been able to lose would have been if it was just him one-on-one versus DeSantis, and DeSantis positioned himself as the mainstream candidate. But it turns out like we thought DeSantis was the smarter version, but it turns out he's actually even dumb. He's way dumber than Trump, because what he's trying to do is he's trying to out-Trump Trump, which was never the winning strategy for him. The winning strategy was to position yourself as the mainstream guy. But that would require a non-brokered race, and there's no control in the Republican Party, so everybody and their grandma is running. So Trump is guaranteed to win. So once you get that Trump-Biden rematch, Biden is definitely going to win. There's, especially with all the indictments and stuff with Trump and just his unpopularity and stuff like that. Assuming the economy holds, again, unless inflation jumps back up to like 8%, like year on year, unless that happens. He's going to win. So he's in a really, really good position right now from, just a political science perspective, political analysis perspective.